Hi, everybody. This is Ryan McNeil and the Builder by Day podcast. Today I'm having a conversation with Michelle Lindsay. Michelle, thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I should mention, you and I have chatted once before about, was it last
Probably
summer?
9 months ago.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we have had a conversation before once off camera, but other than that, we're not well known to one another, but it's not the first day we've met. But what I like to do normally when I start these conversations is give my guests an opportunity to introduce themselves. Rather than me introduce you, I like you to just kind of tell everybody a little bit about who you are.
Sure. My name is Michelle Lindsay, and I grew up in Montreal, actually. And I am a Canadian, a wife and a mother, nothing different than that. Well, I guess I'm an entrepreneur as well. I actually worked in the corporate field for a very long time in the dental implant industry. And then once I started having my kids, realized that I couldn't travel across Canada anymore or to the United States promoting dental implants. So I made my home in different areas of Canada. So I went from Montreal to Vancouver, and then Toronto, and then Halifax.
Okay.
And in Halifax, I actually worked for a dental lab for a while, and then actually decided when my middle child was in grade 4 to actually homeschool for a while. So I did actually homeschool for about 2 years, and got them reading, and I felt that their reading wasn't at par, and gave them a foundation and helped them communicate to the community, not just to their peers but to people from all ages, and put them back in school. And then I started working as an entrepreneur. I developed a program in the functional aging fitness realm, and it's called Functional Fit to Function. And I worked, how did I get there? I worked with 2 PhDs down in the States, and they taught me how to train mature adults, because what I was finding was that there were a lot of people getting sick, and it wasn't because they wanted to get sick, but they didn't know how to keep their bodies healthy. So I developed this program, and I'm still doing it today. I started that in 2015, and today I work out of Temple Studio on Main Street in Dartmouth, and I have a regular class that I see, and doctors even send me patients after hip replacement, knee replacement, and post-physio.
Okay.
And another business that I started I developed here was Naturally Rooted, and that's a hair loss studio. And I work with mainly women who have challenges with hair growth.
Okay.
And so I work with them, and I do, the supplements, the laser, the shampoos, and all that stuff. And, they're both good businesses. I'm a sole proprietor, and so that keeps me busy. But why I'm here and how I met you was we talked politics. We wanted to talk about what was going on in Canada. Mm-hmm. And never thought that I would be involved in politics at all. In 2017, when I was watching one of my sons play basketball, I was reading the Metro newspaper. You remember when there were newspapers? Mm-hmm. And on the front cover was, "We should not celebrate our centennial or the 150th anniversary of Canada." And it was Dalhousie, a student who was the president of the union, the student union, saying that, we were settlers, colonialists, we should push back and not celebrate Canada. And I come from a long line of people who have served in the military, mm-hmm. in the Navy. Mm-hmm. My mother was a Wren. My dad was in the Navy. And I am a patriot. My parents were patriots. And I thought, you know what? I will never not celebrate my country.
Right.
And so that's kind of how I was, I just started looking at what was going on in the political realm. And then when I started seeing Trudeau say that our borders were open, basically, everyone's welcome to Canada, that shouldn't be a thing. Mm-hmm. The government is responsible for national security and our economic well-being, as well as our wellness, for the welfare of Canadians. Mm-hmm. I thought there's something going on here in Canada. It doesn't look right. So then I started to do research on, what parties would actually be aligned with my beliefs. And I thought most Canadians. And so that's when I started following Maxime Bernier, who had stepped away from the Conservative Party and created his People's Party of Canada. And I went to see him at a presentation in January 2019 in Halifax. And I went up to him and I said, if you need people to run for you, I will be one of them.
Okay.
And that's how everything started for me.
This was 2019.
Yes.
Naturally, this conversation is going to be political in nature.
In some ways, sure. I mean, we could talk about anything. You know, one of the things I do is talk about wellness for Canadians. So we can talk about that later on if you want.
Sure.
So I found that the People's Party of Canada, their policies aligned more with my views and my beliefs and what I see as a future for Canada. And I didn't see any of the other parties really have a platform like that.
What would you say? So there's a lot of directions we can go here now. This will be a good conversation. So prior to 2019 or even 2017, when you saw the Metro News, had the thought of politics ever entered your brain? Like, did you ever consider being in politics before that?
You know, it's really
even
hard
remotely?
to say.
Like, did the thought cross your mind?
Actually, when I was going to CEGEP, I was taking a political science course, and I thought, what's the use of this political science course? But it was teaching us about democracy and communism and socialism and that. I wasn't really interested in that. I found it difficult to follow, and I grew up in Quebec, so we were really trying to prevent separatism, right? So it was more about how to push back against separatism and stay within Canada. You know, maybe as a Girl Guide, I was in Girl Guides, and being in Montreal, one of the field trips was let's go to the House of Commons. Okay. And so maybe from there, I thought about, you know, it would be great to be able to create laws and create policy for Canada and for Canadians and make things always better to improve people's lives.
For people who aren't familiar with the People's Party, if you had to summarize that in a blurb here, how would you do that? I mean, I'm somewhat familiar with the PPC because I'm somebody who has looked into it. I've been on the website. I've read through the platform. There's a lot of stuff in there that makes a lot of sense to me, but I run into people every day, conservative, quote unquote, conservative minded people that would be on the, you know, quote unquote right, who, even those folks who are just not in any way familiar with the People's Party. So if you had to summarize that or kind of start that conversation to paint a picture of what the People's Party represents, how would you summarize that?
I think it provides the People's Party has a vision for Canada, and I think it's a vision that many Canadians have, and it's for putting Canadians first. So when we have those taxpayers' dollars, we're bringing it back to what can we do for Canadians, and not to make them dependent upon government. We want to empower Canadians. So that's one of the things that the People's Party thinks about, is empowering Canadians and always thinking about Canadians first, because that's what a government is supposed to do, put their citizens first. Right. And so the People's Party puts citizens first and believes in smaller government so that you don't have to keep increasing the taxes on people, and you want people to be able to reap the rewards from their work and not have to pay over half of their, say, bonus money to the government. And I'm seeing that in some families where someone, makes maybe $20,000 bonus, but only gets to keep half or less. Right. So we want to empower Canadians, and we want to ensure that the government is working for Canadians. And then the extra money that we have, for, say, tsunami relief or anything like that, sure, we can provide that to other nations, but we have to put Canada first. And so the responsibility is for national security, economic prosperity, and the welfare of Canadians. Okay. And you're a candidate for the PPC in what will be your riding? Yes, correct? It's Dartmouth Cole Harbour. Okay. As you know, I don't know if you do know this, and many Canadians may not know this. Every 10 years, Elections Canada does look at the ridings and how many people are in each riding. Usually there's about 80,000 to 120,000 electors in each riding. And so recently, we had 338 MPs representing Canada. Now we have 343 that will be elected in the next election in 2025 because has been more growth in Canada. And so each person's vote is equal. If you have too many people in a riding, say 150,000, then the weight of that person's vote wouldn't be the same as someone in a, say, 100,000 person elector riding.
Okay.
So we have 343. And so I'm in Dartmouth Cole Harbour, which has been modified a little bit. So part of Dartmouth now is part of Bedford.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I have Dartmouth, Cole Harbour, and Eastern Passage now.
Okay. And does the PPC have a candidate chosen or selected for all the ridings in the province at this point? Do you know?
No, not yet. Okay. Not yet. And neither do the other parties too.
Okay.
Like the dinosaur parties.
Sure, yeah.
We're working on that, and so it takes time, and we do have to go through a thorough vetting process to ensure that that person can properly represent the citizens of their riding.
Sure. And when the time comes for an election, whenever that happens, because at this point, who knows when that's going to happen, right? We all would like it to happen sooner rather than later, but maybe it's April, May, maybe it's the summer, maybe it's October, maybe they try some shenanigans and it's not even in October. But when the time comes, does the PPC intend to have a candidate in each riding? Do you know,
yes.
in the province?
Yes,
okay.
we do. We do. And, Max would love to have 343.
Sure.
Even last election, I can't remember how many we had, over 300. But, the Conservative Party didn't have a candidate in every riding in Canada. Mm-hmm. Because in my riding, that candidate had to step down. So I was the only conservative-leaning candidate in my riding.
Okay.
And I did approach the Conservative EDA and ask them if they would help me beat the NDP and the Liberal candidate, and they really weren't interested in that. Whereas I thought if they were concerned about putting Canadians first, why wouldn't they want to beat the Liberals and the NDP and help me win?
Sure. What do you think the overall sentiment is from the Conservative Party toward the People's Party?
Well, from my experience in my riding, I think that they don't want the People's Party to have a seat in Parliament because we would be pushing back against a lot of the non-Canadian first policies. And we are I think we're the only party right now who's really pushing back against mass immigration. Mm-hmm. And we'd like targeted immigration. And I don't even hear the Conservatives talking about that. And so, I think if we had people in Parliament, we could actually cause a trigger effect in the next election. We could even get more. Sure. And it could hurt the Conservative Party, and it would hurt the other parties too. I have a lot of supporters from the NDP and from the Liberal Party. And how that happened was in the last election. A lot of the Liberal followers and supporters were pro-choice. And when they didn't have a choice to take the vaccination, the COVID vax, mm-hmm. they came over to my side.
Mm-hmm. So I remember back when that was taking place, like in 2020, 2021, I remember, kind of seeing Maxime Bernier was obviously pretty vocal about mm-hmm. that. And do you think that was a bit of a catalyst for some people? Like, do you think that was a line in the sand for some people? Okay.
Definitely. I think it was a catalyst. Our Constitution states that you should not be forced to take any experimental treatment. Mm-hmm. And we were doing that. Not me. I mean, the government was doing that. Mm-hmm. And they did it under the guise that, well, people are dying, and if you don't take the vaccination, you're going to transmit it to someone. But we do know that Pfizer had stated that vaccine was never tested for transmission. And they said that they didn't have time to test it for transmission. And they said if the governments did require testing for transmission, that it would have taken a lot longer to get that out on the market.
Sure.
And so, from there, I could see the government was not telling the truth nor transparent. And so people, when I said, we don't believe that people should be forced to take a treatment, people understood that. And especially when we have freedoms in Canada, you can't trample on. Mm-hmm. And the PPC was the only party talking about that. People came over to our side.
Mm-hmm. You do have some folks that make the argument that nobody was forced to take it. Now, I don't make that argument. What I say to people who then say that is something to the effect of, well, if your job was threatened, if your livelihood was threatened, if it was take this shot or lose your job, then that's definitely force.
Is that extortion?
You call a number of things, but it was also, even on a lesser scale, it was if you don't take the shot, you can't go into this particular facility or you can't participate in this
That's
group.
right. So you can't
there's no question that it was forced upon us. It was also forced upon us in the sense that just how it was being presented. It was forced based on the picture that was being painted. And remember, I'll never forget this. Remember, you probably remember this, but CNN used to have like a daily ticker. It was just counting cases and deaths. I think they had both, like COVID cases and COVID deaths. And it was just like a running ticker on CNN at all the time. I remember watching that. I'm like, this is amazing to me. This is crazy that they would do this.
Well, there's a lot packed in there.
Yeah, we don't want to go down the COVID
You could talk a little
hole.
bit because it is the 3rd anniversary of the Freedom Convoy, right now. The ticker was, I think that was sort of like a mind manipulation maneuver.
Sure it was. That whole thing was, even now, it's hard to even get your head around because it's, for the average person to try to find the truth about that whole situation, and most people aren't actively seeking the truth on it. Most people look at that as, well, it's behind us now. COVID's behind us. And they don't, I think any logical, reasonable person looking back is looking at that and going, we definitely didn't have all the information. And at the very least, there was information being withheld and there was some shenanigans going on one way or another. The thing I always found super interesting was that we had this new virus that shows up and the whole world is affected, and then what was it? Pfizer, Moderna, what was the other one? AstraZeneca
and Johnson & Johnson.
Right. So everyone all these countries put the US and Canada, I can't speak for all around the world. I wasn't paying attention to media outside of Canada and the US, but everybody's on the same page and we got to hurry up and get vaccine. We got to find a vaccine. We got to remember all that talk. It was like daily. They were giving you an update on how close they are to having a vaccine. And then lo and behold, all of those companies had a vaccine independently of one another. They all created a vaccine within the same week. They were like within days of each other. They all landed on a vaccine.
Is that Operation Warp Speed?
Yeah. But what are the chances of that? So you all had to find a vaccine, create it, invent it, whatever the terminology is there. I'm not a medical expert, but we went from no vaccine to all companies have a vaccine simultaneously at essentially almost on the same day, but they're not working with each other, right? They're not sharing that information, are they? How did they all land on it? Does it take a certain number of days for people to find a vaccine for any virus? That was all very weird to me. Because it would have seemed like, I would have expected, okay, maybe somebody comes up with it, and they're sort of the first to market, and then others kind of linger in. How did they all just within days of, literally a couple days of each other, land on, we got it, we got a vaccine. You can have, which one do you want? Do you want Pfizer, Moderna? You want one of each, AstraZeneca? Remember, that was amazing to me. How did that possibly happen?
I know. I remember talking to Dr. Bridle, who is a professor. I think he's like at the University of Waterloo or Western, and he teaches vaccinologists how to create vaccines. And he said, a really good vaccine takes about 12 to 15 years, like a safe vaccine.
Right.
And
What did this take? Not a year?
yeah, and so he did approach Pfizer, and he said, you're usually it's a long-term study, and their excuse was, well, instead of long-term, we're going to increase our sample size. Mm-hmm. And so he said, well, you can't switch sample size for long-term, like for the length of time.
Right.
And so he thought that was really dangerous. And so that's why he was doing presentations, press conferences to Canadians about his questioning this efficacy and safety of the vaccine. It was something that they were able to get this at warp speed. And, I had friends who happily took the AstraZeneca when it came here to Canada. They took it. They said, "Oh, wow, we took it. We were in a business meeting." And then, a week later, or maybe a couple of days after they had their AstraZeneca vaccine, it was taken off the market here because of possible thrombosis or stroke. And I saw them, about 2 weeks after. I said, well, how do you feel about that? They're like, what can we do? We have anxiety now about like what our health is going to be like. But we're told that we probably have to take the second one, but not AstraZeneca. It would be Moderna or Pfizer.
Yeah, a few people did that. I had one and then a different one later.
Yeah, which I couldn't really understand, but maybe they had one vaccine, and then maybe you had all of these companies who had the possibility of, like, they knew how they were able to produce vaccines, and they had the facility, so maybe they just, okay, Pfizer's doing this one, AstraZeneca, Moderna, so they had the facilities to maybe make a similar vaccine. They were all mRNA except for Johnson & Johnson, I think.
Right.
And Johnson & Johnson, you only had to have one. Mm-hmm. I did have a vaccine. I took one because I was concerned about the people that I was training.
Sure.
They were over 70. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I was like, okay, well, what if I kill them? Because I was, again, maybe my brain was hijacked. But I was thinking about, what if I give them a sickness and then I kill one of them?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's what, but of course you thought that. That's what we were all being told.
Yes, I thought
that's what we were being told.
But, I should have been a little bit, I did hesitate. It took me 4 times in order to actually get the shot. I kept canceling my appointment. And, so this was 2021. And I hadn't been sick myself since 2013. Because I was working on my immune system with my supplements and my food.
Sure.
And my family had asked me, like, are you sure you want to take that? You're pretty healthy. Like, you don't get sick, you don't get colds, So I said, well, I'm not sure. But then I did go for it. And then the day after, I had vertigo, which scared the heck out of me. And I was very concerned. And it was on and off for 3.5 months. I didn't take the second shot at all. And hopefully that mRNA is out of my system.
Let's talk about some of the current affairs and what's going on politically. Like, for instance, I'd like to get your thoughts on the current state of affairs when it comes to the current Liberal government and our current governing body, and the prorogued parliament, and the fact that we don't currently have an operational government at all. They're basically all whatever they're doing. They're not doing their job. And what are your thoughts on all that? The current, where we are currently, what are your thoughts on what you think may unfold when it comes to elections and timing and so on?
Well, I was, kind of disappointed that actually, I was happy when Trudeau said he was going to resign. And then
I wasn't. I wanted him to get a public beating. I wanted to see that.
Yeah. I was like, okay, so he's going to resign. And, but then he didn't really step down.
No.
And so this is just another example of how much power he wants. Instead of trying to empower Canadians, he wants to keep the power for himself. Mm-hmm. And so he is concerned with the leadership of his party. And so then goes to Mary Simon, our Governor General, and says, I want to prorogue government. And I'm sure she was probably looking at somewhere in the Constitution or what are the laws I have to follow here? And there was nothing because she obviously said yes. And she's responsible for a healthy government functioning. And so he prorogues government just for a leadership race. Who does that? And when you're in a possible crisis,
Right.
Looking at and facing possible 25% tariffs for our economy, you can just see that that's a selfish move, and he doesn't care about Canadians.
Yeah, I think that's pretty obvious. Yeah.
And he hasn't cared about Canadians for the longest time, telling you that you couldn't travel on a plane or a train or a bus maybe, or you couldn't do business if you weren't fully vaccinated, when he had no idea what the repercussions were on our health of those vaccines.
Well, I think even setting the COVID stuff aside and the vaccination stuff aside, the Liberal government, who has been in power for essentially 10 years now, their policies also don't reflect the fact that they care about Canadians, because their policies are not pro-Canadian. They're anything but. They're anything but.
They're anything but. And I guess was there a foreshadow when he said after he was elected that we're a post-nationalist country? Well, that's scary right there.
Of course it is.
Like, what do you mean?
Right.
And I don't know, was he looking at the Multicultural Act thinking that all cultures are equal and therefore, Canada is a free-for-all? Because I don't believe Canada is a free-for-all.
No, nor do I.
And I think, one of the reasons why I get involved in politics now is because I'm just carrying the torch from my grandparents and my parents.
For your kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they put the effort in.
Sure.
With minimal education. Now, they gave me a great life, education, and so I should have expected them to expect from me that I carry that torch for the freedoms of all Canadians and my generations to come.
Sure. Yeah, the whole government situation currently it's just hard to get your head around, and it's been 10 years or more, but certainly in the last 10 years, this new thing has happened where certainly when we were, if you go back 20 years, this is certainly the case, but I think it's actually probably started right around the time 2015, whenever Trudeau was elected, that it used to be rude to even ask somebody who they vote for, right? It used to be rude to ask somebody, if they vote Liberal or Conservative. That was private information. That was like asking someone about their religious beliefs, for instance. It was right
or
up there.
Their health.
Yeah, it was just right up there with, well, that's personal and you don't need to know. And that was always the case. Doesn't mean that people didn't have political conversations, but it was normally, in that case, it was a scenario where everybody willfully was engaging in that conversation. But now it's become politics, and which side you're on or which party you're with has become something where now that defines who you are. And that's been done purposely, right? So if you're a liberal, then people have a liberal voter, if you're a liberal voter, people have certain predispositions, I guess, or certain thoughts about who you are as a person. And if you're a conservative, people have thoughts about who you are as a person. And from what I can see from a social media perspective, if you're a PPC voter, then people have certain ideas about who you are as a person. And it's weird that I think part of that is the fact that social media has created that environment where whatever the topic is, like you could be reading news. It could be even a CBC News article, which we all know is far from conservative, but it could be a CBC News article, and people will make comments on that. Of course, 90% of the people on social media are anonymous because they're not willing to actually put their face and name to what they're saying. But nevertheless, when I scroll through these comments, it's never about the issue at hand. It's never somebody arguing their point of view. It's always liberals versus conservatives and, lefties and righties. And so it's just, everything has been divided that way. And that's going to be a tall task, I think, to get people to stop thinking that way. And if people were to think, well, never mind what party you're in line with. What is the issue at hand? And the party that you support or that you plan to vote for, where do they stand on that issue? And I bet if you were to ask the average person, pick any of the issues, if you were to ask the average person where their party stands on it, I bet they couldn't tell you. I bet they couldn't tell you where. I bet you the average Liberal voter couldn't tell you where the Liberal Party stands on its immigration policy, because who could tell you? They change their mind. Now they just change every week anyway. They say something different every week. But that's what they've been doing. What I've noticed in the last, well, maybe since holiday time frame, when all this stuff started shaking out, and you could see that this was probably going to turn into either an early election or somebody stepping down. Something was going to happen. All the, these MPs were stepping down. The deputy prime minister, the finance minister,
Christian.
quit. First it was she quit, then it was she got fired. Who knows what the real truth is there? Nobody tells the truth anyway. But then you could kind of see it starting to unravel.
Yeah.
But now they say completely different things. Now you have the party who has been forcing the carbon tax, just driving it down our throats for years, and have fought tooth and nail to defend it, and it's going to increase in April, isn't it? The same party who was all about carbon tax and how it was the only way to deal with things, and it's an absolute necessity and it's good for everybody. Just like that, they're dropping it. Right?
Yeah,
They're going to drop it.
You're right. Thinking about the right and left, I think about also authoritarian and libertarian, like
Sure.
another branch, right?
Sure.
And but I think about the liberals, they promote themselves as the compassionate people, right?
Right.
And then if you're more conservative leaning, like the People's Party or the Conservatives maybe, then you're not so compassionate. Right? But what does compassion really mean? Like, do you just want to help people and not let them become independent and let them become dependent upon you? We need to empower Canadians, like we were talking about. Like, we want people to be thriving from their own work, right? From their own efforts. And I think that's what we really need to be promoting for Canadians, because I think we've allowed the government to take care of too many people, too much, right? Sure, you know what? Growing up, I always thought, we need to take care of the people who cannot help themselves.
Sure.
But that's not the people that we see today.
Right.
We have a lot of people that can help themselves, but we're not helping them by just giving them money so that they can sit at home.
That's right.
And you see a lot of depression when people don't seem to have a purpose.
Right.
And so it's really important to for the welfare of Canadians, which is one of the three pillars that a government needs to be looking after, that we need to say, how are we going to help Canadians have a purpose and feel good about how they are participating in society, right?
Yeah, I think that you're right, and I think that that compassion has nowadays a lot of folks take that same sentiment that you have, that the Liberal Party is the compassionate party, but it's really sometimes it's just people that want to feel good about themselves. So they want to feel good that they support the party that is just open doors and who needs some money and who can we help, but they're not realists. They're not looking at the real situation. They have no idea how much money is really being spent outside of this country on things that it would just shock and amaze you.
Well,
to
look
see.
at we have the border because we have sovereignty over that border, and we have to look after the people that are within that border, and we look after the economy, and we do have welfare programs for the people that need help within those borders. And in February 2023, I think it was 2023. I'm just trying to think. Yeah, February 2023, I went to Roxham Road and with Maxime Bernier. And we wanted to stage a protest there with people because we wanted Canadians, and a lot of Canadians didn't know that Roxham Road, what even Roxham Road was, but it was an open border between Quebec and New York State. And people were coming across, and at least 65,000 people just came across as asylum seekers. And as soon as you step foot on Canada's ground, you can say that you were asylum seeker, and because of the way our Immigration Act is, that you could stay here. And you didn't get a trial right away. I mean, maybe your trial was in 24 months, 48 months, and we don't know what happened to you. So it's important for security, national security, to have those borders closed. So I have to say that right after we did that, we staged that protest February 25th, 2023. The week after, it was all in the newspapers. Maybe we should close Roxham Road. They didn't give PPC any credit,
Sure.
but they closed that border soon after. And however, we have open borders coming through Montreal and Toronto airports still.
Yeah, sure.
So that's an issue,
Sure.
right? But when we have open borders, how do we control where the taxpayers' money is going for helping Canadians? Because see, here's the compassion. We have to help everyone who wants to come in. Well, it's not a right for everyone to come into our borders. It's a privilege.
Of course it isn't.
Right?
Of course it isn't.
And my ancestors fought to give me the rights here in Canada and have a great life here. Can't help that other people from other nations, their ancestors didn't really fight for them. But we have to protect what our ancestors fought for.
Sure.
And
Well, not only that, people just have a weird outlook on that. And I always try to just bring it back to something smaller, like your own home, your own
Yes.
property, right? Or you could even go expand a little bit, and you could call it, your own community even. But nobody would ever make that argument for their own home, right? So nobody would ever say, well, listen, the guy showed up, he knocked on my door, he was up against it, he was seeking asylum, he's coming from a rough spot, he's got a bad situation, so I just opened the door and showed him down the hall and flipped on the light and said, hey man, you can stay here as long as you want, and if you need some money, let me know. That's never going to happen in your own house. It's insane. But it's no different. It's no different in the country, except they're not sleeping in your house, they're in a hotel or wherever they end up being. And you're not physically reaching into your pocket and handing this person some money, but your tax money's going there, and other people's tax money is going there. So it doesn't matter if it's what the situation is, and it's not. And some people, of course, they're of the frame of mind that we should just help whoever shows up at the door. But that's insanity.
well, there's the compassion. That's right. That's the compassion.
Suicidal empathy is what it is.
Yep,
Right?
that's right. That's right. And what's the breaking point for our society? And well, we saw it because our housing, right?
Right.
We had that shortage in housing, and
we still have
of course.
It's getting worse every day.
And then it pushes the supply and demand. I mean, I took a Bachelor of Commerce at McGill, and I took economics, and there was this principle of supply and demand.
It's a real thing. It really exists.
Yes. And it's there are a lot of people who think it was because of COVID or because of the Ukraine war that prices went up. No, there's a lot of other factors that are involved in this. And when you invite people into your nation and you do not have a place for them to live, that's a real problem. And now there's competition between the citizens and the new people who come in.
Sure.
And then the standards get lowered and problems start arising.
Yeah. And we see it right here. We don't have to look at that at a national level. You can see it right here in this city. You have, I've had conversations with a few people, and we've thrown the real numbers around of, plus or minus 5,000 units built. That's enough for 12 or 15,000 people. But we have 30-some thousand people landing here, net population increase. So where are they going, right? Where are they living?
Well, I know that, like there was a home recently sold on my street, and it's a single family dwelling, was an older couple, so they sold. And so the gentleman, I met him who bought the home, but he doesn't live here. He lives in another area of Canada. Mm-hmm. And now he has 8 to 9 people living in that home with 9 cars all parked down the street.
Yeah, that is an all too common story that I've heard from a number of people, clients that we have met and are building houses for, real estate agents that I've spoken to that have helped people buy and sell some properties where you have single family homes here in the city that are designed for, a single family, right? 4 or 5 people, whatever. Maybe it's a big family. Maybe it's 6 or 7 people. But in some of these cases, there are 16, 18, 20 people living in this single family home. And like you said, there might be 8 or 9 or 10 vehicles coming, and it's not even the same 20 people.
Yeah.
It's more like a hotel. It could be 20 different people kind of coming and going all the time.
You're correct. And so when we talk about, when you have a mass of people coming in all at the same time, I think it's difficult to relay the standards that we're used to having in Canada. And so on my street, so we have a standard for shoveling and for plowing. And so, when we first had our first snowfall here in Halifax, these people had no idea what the parking ban was about.
Right.
And so plows coming down the street, I'm a taxpayer. I pay for that to be plowed properly.
Mm-hmm.
And now the street is not plowed properly and there's one lane instead of 2 lanes.
Did HRM show up and put
No,
tickets on
didn't
the cars?
ticket them.
No, of course not.
No. And, because I guess, we could have called, but I thought it would be best to just knock on their door and say, hey, just want to tell you, you could get a ticket. But actually there were 8 cars there at the time. No one answered the door. And so I was just kindly trying to tell them that you could get a ticket. So eventually I think they did move, but it happened again. And so we're down to 1 lane at the mouth of our street. And so it's just little things like that. And I think it can annoy people. And people want to be good neighbors.
Yeah.
We want to be good neighbors. But we just need to be able to relay that there are certain standards that we have to adhere to, especially when you have people paying high taxes in our municipality.
Sure. Yeah, and those little things that you mentioned, they're not little things. They're huge things to people in their everyday, regular life. Those are the results of these big picture problems like immigration, right? So when people say we have problems with immigration, yeah, we do, but that's a very complex problem. Of course, it's hard for the average person to get their head around just the sheer numbers of the number of people coming into the country and what that equates, what that means for everybody. But those small issues or local problems that you mentioned, those are the on the ground real results that you're going to see. That's going to be things like cars parked all over the street and other things that may be a difference of how things are done culturally from where they came from to here. And that's when you're going to see the real impact of these failed policies.
And then people start resenting the people that are coming here because they're not respecting our standards or our laws.
That's sure. Yeah.
Right? And
but they came here, they came here, they're allowed to be here. Like, there would be, of course, there'd be a certain percentage of the population that aren't allowed to. There would be a certain percentage of the population that is here illegally, but that's not the majority of them. And so these folks that come here legally, even though it's a wide open door, we know that, they don't necessarily feel like they've done anything wrong. They've just been allowed to come in. So it's not, I feel for them on one hand, but I can also feel for the other folks that are going, well, this is a single family neighborhood. And now there are houses on the street with 18 people living in them with 10 cars in the street and nobody can get anything plowed. The other thing I've heard is just when it comes to like garbage pickup.
Yep.
Right. And so they don't necessarily know how that works. So the garbage is just always out there. And then whenever garbage day is, they come and gather, but it doesn't get picked up and it gets blown down the street. I've heard that from a number of people.
I was trying to figure out who is it a responsibility for to relay this message to people who are now living in there. So is it the real estate agent?
No, I would think at this point, I think once they're here and they're doing that, it's bylaw enforcement. It should be your municipal
So should
government.
a bylaw enforcer, once they know that the house has changed hands, go and speak to the new owner and say...
They'll never know unless somebody calls. They'll never know unless you call.
Mm-hmm.
But I can tell you from experience as somebody who has made that call, not specifically about that, but has had to call 311 and engage the municipality for an abandoned vehicle on the side of the road that's been there for a week or whatever it is that also in my business, in the construction business, sometimes we have to deal with things that are, that we have to deal with bylaw enforcement. We need some help from the municipality to just enforce the bylaws. It might be going on a neighboring property, whatever it might be, but that is how you do it. But good luck. Good luck getting them to go out and actually enforce the bylaws that are in place. I mean, there was a construction vehicle, a heavy piece of heavy equipment that was parked at the top of my street. Basically, it was parked at the end of my driveway. I kind of let it go I'm in the construction business, and I know it was a piece of paving equipment, and my neighbor up the street had their driveway paved. And so I know how that works. You got to mobilize and move a bunch of equipment, then you pave the job, and then that contractor, that paving contractor, probably didn't want to come get that particular piece of machinery until they were ready to move it to the next job, because they just didn't want to incur the cost of getting it, bringing it back to home base, and then trucking it again where else. So I gave them some leeway, like a lot of leeway. It was like the thing was parked there for like 2 weeks, and then I went, okay, this driveway's clearly done. It was 3 weeks, and then I called bylaw enforcement, it's 311, and said, there's a vehicle here. It's been parked, it's 15 feet from the end of my driveway in a suburban area, so the driveways are 100 feet apart, but it's been there for a month now, and it needs to go, because now we're getting in, like, winter was approaching. It's going to turn into, by now this was probably like November. So I called once, nothing happened. Let's say maybe a week later, 10 days, I called again. Oh yeah, sorry about that. I thought somebody would have taken care of it, kind of thing. No, a week, maybe 10 days later. Now this thing has been here for like 6-7 weeks on the side of the road. And the third time I called, it was, I get the person on the phone. They said, I'm just looking at the notes here, and somebody went out and they couldn't find it, or they couldn't seem to locate this thing that you're talking about. And I'm like, I'm talking to this person on the phone. I'm thinking, look, do I need to send you a picture of it? I'm sitting right here looking at it. It's a yellow piece of machinery that weighs many tons. You can't miss it. You can't miss this thing, right? So eventually they did get it moved, but that's going to be that whole thing. Any of that stuff related to number of people living in a home, improper use of a property is what it is, right? Properties are zoned for specific use, and a single family home is not zoned to be a hotel. That's not what it's for.
Well,
right?
It's funny that you should say that, because I think it was probably 3 or 4 months, maybe 3 months after this person purchased this property. There was a pickup truck there with new doors and drywall and framing and that. So I suspected that they were going to create new suites in the basement or that. And that's what happened probably. I don't know enough about the zoning. I know
that's very against the zoning.
Okay.
I mean, for a number of reasons. Zoning was one thing, but also the fire department should be out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? That's a disaster waiting to happen. Because you can rest assured that, because I've seen people have told me this, real estate agents have told me this, where they've gone in to view properties.
Sure.
And you very clearly have one family living in the basement, one family living in the main floor, one family living upstairs, because there are hot plates and microwaves. You can see that there are they're living separately in the same unit, and that's just entirely. That's no good. That's a disaster waiting to happen.
So are there's such thing as a certified like apartment or a license? What is it called when you have like an apartment that is actually
like an in-law suite or but they would just call it a legal secondary unit.
Yes,
they call them secondary units, right? So some people say in-law suites or nanny suites or secondary suites or just the second unit, but in order to do that properly, there is a building code that has to be followed. There are fire stopping and different things that have to be followed with respect to the fire code. And there's no way any of that's being done, because they would never get a permit to do that. You won't get a permit to take a single family home and turn it into a 15-person hotel, essentially. You'll never get the permits for that. So there's absolutely zero chance that they're going through the proper channels. And that's where bylaw enforcement comes in. That's where these guys need to step up and start knocking on doors and saying, what's going on in here? But then, of course, you know what's going to happen.
No, what's going to happen?
Well, then you're going to have 15 people with nowhere to live, right?
Yeah.
So because the reason they're not doing that, in my opinion, the reason that's not happening is I'm sure they are well aware of what's going on around the city. But that's going to mean a knock on the door. I need to have a look around. You have a look around. Then you contact the property owner and say, what you're doing here, you can't do. So I don't know how that works. I don't know if they get some kind of notice that people have to vacate or they have to do whatever it is they have to do. But regardless, you're going to be putting people out in the cold.
Yeah, and we have a shortage of housing. So yeah,
Right.
so then it's people freezing or
Sure.
abiding by the bylaws.
Sure. So then we get into this predicament where we're like, so what do we do? Just let these things happen because we don't want to
Well, this is
add to the unhoused population?
but that is the result of bad policies
Poor immigration policies. Yes, exactly.
from the beginning. And so when you have, now I always say this, I don't know if Trudeau is incompetent or complicit,
I think he's both.
right?
I don't give Trudeau much credit for.
So
I don't give Trudeau much credit for anything. I don't think Trudeau. I'm not a fan of Trudeau as a human being. I look at him as there's nothing solid there.
Well, what about
It's an
Jagmeet
act.
Singh for someone to prop
Even
him
worse.
up? He's
Even
got to be
worse.
even worse, right? Yeah, and I've heard some people that like my kids' ages in their 20s, and they're like, well, I'm not going to vote for the Liberals, but I'm going to vote for the NDP, and I'm thinking, well, they were the ones that were helping support this mess. Yeah, I just, I'm just really disappointed. Sometimes being a Canadian, I have to say, it's like, could we not have done better? Of course we could have, in terms of selecting this man. And people were convinced that maybe he had something because his dad was a prime minister and he understood the role of being prime minister as being responsible and accountable to Canadians. But he was only elected on no merit except his name. And
Right.
we really have to do better. And we have to look at who is like the transparency of things and who really is able to do a job like that. And, I'm not, people call me a politician. I'm not a politician. I was never elected. But I understand things. Mm-hmm. I have two businesses that I understand. There's like you've got financial statements that you have to do, and it's like, okay, you spend and then you bring in the money. It's like you have to realize that there has to be some health to your income and what you're doing every day.
Sure. Well, yeah, you could be even in your own world. If you just decided you're not going to make decisions based on being fiscally responsible, you're just going to provide training to people because they need it. And you're going to volunteer your time. You're going to be compassionate. In other words, you wouldn't be in business very long, and you wouldn't be in business at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. It's hard to get your head around how we got to this place. But in my opinion, one of the absolute probably the main contributing factor to why everyone is so all over the place, I guess, with what they think is the media. It's just how the media has presented everything. And even still currently, when you look at, I stress to everybody that, in my world, anyone that I talk to that I have a casual relationship with, I stress to all of them, you need to be looking into this stuff and educating yourself on it. And I don't think any news source or app or whatever is you can't put your faith entirely in any of them, but you have to cross-reference things. So yeah, sure, if you're watching the CBC or CTV or one of the legacy media outlets, that's great. What are some of the other news outlets saying about this same topic? And all too often what you're going to find is, for instance, on X, where the most of the news takes place, and I'm not saying there's not negativities or bad things when it comes to X, but it's amazing to me the stories that just simply don't make it to the media. Like the CBCs and CTVs of the world don't ever even report this information, and some of it is like earth-shattering stuff that I'm thinking, how could any respectful national media company whose mandate is to deliver the news and information to citizens of this country, for instance, how could you just completely ignore some of these just earth-shattering bits of information and things that are taking place and not ever even bring it to light, not ever give it the time of day? Like, for instance, the link that you had sent me to the conversation about when we were talking border and fentanyl and criminal activity and organized crime and gangs and foreign influence and all this stuff that is really happening, and you never hear about it in the quote unquote mainstream media.
Yeah, like the 4,000 criminal organizations in Canada.
Right.
The RCMP knows
4,000
about it.
independent
Yes.
gangs.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And
Not
it's
4,000 people working for the same
independent
drug
gangs. No,
cartel.
yeah.
4,000 independent gangs working in the drug industry, distributing illegal narcotics, shipping them around, moving them around.
I didn't know
whatever
about that
Nor
until
did
I dug into it on X, right?
Sure.
And then I saw the RCMP talking about it at a trial or a committee.
Right, and that's my point exactly. So you have this RCMP officer who is speaking in front of a committee. This person is a member of the RCMP. They didn't interview some guy that has something to say. This is a member of the RCMP laying out this information in front of people. You will not find that anywhere on CBC, CTV. You won't find it.
I think that the mainstream media likes to maintain the agenda for the Liberal Party or the NDP. And so even, when they don't even talk about the People's Party. They're not supposed to, because it gives them traction. It'll give the People's Party traction. Oh. So when I go door to door, people are like, oh, what are the People's Party? Oh, I like what you have to say. Yeah, I'll vote for you.
Sure.
Right? But they've never heard of it because they will not give us traction. That's why they're trying to keep Maxime Bernier out of the leadership debates even. Mm-hmm. It's, I have friends and family members who think the CBC is their shrine. It's their shrine, right? And whatever the CBC says, that's, what they believe, or the CTV, or even like Global or that, right?
Right.
But it's funny. Some people are starting to open up and wake up and go, you know what? I find that the CBC doesn't really align with me anymore.
Sure.
They seem to be, leaning towards the left too much now. Remember the drag queen stories that they had for kids and stuff. And so
that would be like, for instance, cultural related things. But even when it comes to news related items or just things in the news currently right now, I've watched how that story's been spun around, and it was Trump wanted certain things done with respect to the border. Yeah. We're entirely anti-Trump now. The media has been anti-Trump forever, but the Liberal Party, the NDP, they were anti-Trump before he was elected. It was the rhetoric was just nonstop. And so now he's elected, and they're down there in their own country, in the U.S. They are just, it's amazing what they're doing. They're just, I don't know if you've seen any attention to that. I paid any attention to that in the last few days, but like with USAID and these different organizations that have similar to what you and I were talking about earlier, with sending money to other countries all around the world, and Trump and his administration and Musk and these guys who are the the DOGE, right? The Department of Government Efficiency, right? But what they're doing is, and people are upset. This amazes me. I've seen so many people say, nobody voted for Elon Musk, and Elon's really in charge and Trump's not in charge. I've seen all of that, and I understand where you're coming from, but what are you upset about? They're exposing this fraudulent activity, the spending of billions and billions of dollars in other countries and on programs. Some of the stuff is just, it would blow your mind to hear it, and they don't mention it on the legacy media. So unless you're on X and paying attention, you're probably not seeing that anyway. But if they're doing that in their own country, and also the cleaning up their agencies and the bureaucracy, then they're obviously not going to live next door to this gong show that we have going on. They're not going to focus on efficiency and anti-corruption and all those things in their own country, and then live next door to this country that is corrupted. We've been corrupted. And of course, Trump knows what's going on there. Trump would obviously be well informed of what's really taking place and how much influence China really has on the Canadian government and what's really going on in the fentanyl crisis and the distribution thereof. And I don't pretend to know all that information, but I do know that I feel very confident that the Trump administration and the U.S. government is far better informed about that than I am. And if they think it's a problem, then it's a problem. Also, similar to like I said earlier, the link that you sent and some of the information that I've seen from people who have written books about this stuff. Again, I don't have all the answers, but I trust the fact that these people know what they're talking about, and the fact that nobody else is talking about it and it gets no airtime and it never is brought to light in the mainstream media is alarming, and it should be concerning to everybody because it's hugely important, and we just pretend like it's not happening.
Well, like I sent you that link, I think, for Sam Cooper's book, The Willful Bliss. And he was investigating this, the fentanyl precursors coming in from China into Canada for 10 years.
Right.
And so he must have had these amazing conversations with people in our government, and nothing was done.
Right.
And, I
nothing's
think
still being done.
Nothing is still being done.
Right.
Now, but with the pressures of Trump, hopefully it'll be done. However, we have a prorogued parliament, so I don't know where the $1.3 billion gets approved to be spent.
Sure. So
that's an issue as well.
Yeah, we don't have a functioning government at this time, so how does anything happen?
That's right.
Right.
I'm really, I support Trump in that he said to his people, this is what I will be doing. Right. I will be protecting my American citizens from these dangers.
Right.
And so when he sees us not even protecting Canadians,
right,
but then infiltrating into America, he's going to do something. He's going to say, like, this was my promise, and I'm going to fix this. How do I fix this? Well, now I have to talk to the government of Canada or the government of Mexico.
Right.
And, I'm glad he's doing that because I think the only other politician who really tried to help Canadians, who was in government and elected at the time, was Christine Anderson, an MEP from the European Union, who talked about us being coerced to take certain things like vaccinations and that. So now Trump is working on our behalf to protect us.
Right. Yeah, the Trump thing is a sticky situation because I understand why people would have their thoughts on Trump. I understand why anyone would have negative thoughts toward Trump. I get it. I especially get it since that's what they've been told to think. But if you just look at it at the base level, what they're trying to accomplish, and I don't like this 51st state thing.
I'm not into that. I'm a Canadian,
I'm a Canadian. I want to be a Canadian. I don't ever want to see Canada join the U.S. But I do believe that we have a scenario where, first of all, the U.S. is in charge. Make no mistake. Canadians have this misconception where they think we're sort of somehow on par with the U.S. when it comes to anything. We're not on par with them on anything, on any level. Militarily, GDPs, the economy, nothing are we, we're just like, we are more like a state.
Well,
as far as they're concerned. We're just a state.
Symbiotic relationship between Canada and the U.S., right?
But the idea is this talk over the last week or so or more of trade wars and back and forth and retaliate and stand up for ourselves. That's not how this is going to work. We don't ever want that to happen because we will get stomped to death. We can't. We're not in charge. We can have.
We're not. No. Yeah, exactly. No. I mean, they have 400 million people, and we have 40 million people.
That's right.
Our country's population is about equal to California's.
Right.
Right. And so we're not anywhere near their GDP at all and their power. I can't say that I'm a supporter of Trump, but I'm a supporter of some of these policies.
Sure. Yeah.
That he's trying to do.
That's fair. And the argument for the past week or so has been, especially on the media and on the liberal side of things, there's been people arguing that, well, it's not about the border, though. It's not about fentanyl. That's just an excuse. Trump just wants us to be the 51st state. He wants to bully us around. But my thought on that is, well, first of all, I don't think that's accurate at all. And secondly, okay, then call his bluff. Fix the border. Fix the criminal activity. In other words, do your job. We all want you to do that anyway. It's not like anyone up here in Canada is saying, no, we think you should just ignore the crime and ignore the drug crisis and ignore the border like you've been doing for 10 years. So what's the downside? So if he's saying fix the border and I'll drop this tariff thing, then fix the border. But it's not really, the border's too simplified. I do agree with those folks. It's not as simple as fixing the border. He wants us to fix our government is what he wants us to do. That's a bigger task because our government is rotten from top to bottom with all the things that he's getting rid of in his government. all these policies that make no sense, that are not pro-Canadian, or in their case, pro-American policies. So they're doing that on the other side of the border. And what he wants is to see us do the same thing up here. But as Canadians, why wouldn't we want that? If we make ourselves more independent and stronger as a nation, then we don't have a scenario where we have to worry about the bully next door trying to take all our shit from us.
That's right. Well, I mean, we just have to beef up. Like, really, our border control should be robust.
Sure.
Because we expect it to be. All Canadians expect it to be robust for our protection, right? And we do have a fentanyl problem here. And fentanyl is being laced with other things. And, you know, a very small portion of fentanyl can kill many, many people.
Yeah.
And that's a real problem. You know, yeah, a border is a very important aspect to a country. National security and security.
Yeah, I mean, from
and safety.
From the federal government's perspective, it's at the very tippy top of the list.
Yeah, yeah, it should be. It should be. It should be. And so now you're starting to see, and I did print off an article here. You're starting to see people talk about like within Canada, maybe having better free trade within Canada itself. So there was a Canada Free Trade Agreement that happened in 2017. And it was to break down the barriers between provinces. And so it's like, okay, let's revisit that again, because we probably need to improve that as well. And I know the People's Party has had that policy since 2019, and people are just like brushing it aside. But hey, it's come up again, and it came up in Pierre Poilievre's speech recently that maybe we should look at reducing those trade barriers between the provinces.
If you were to ask somebody, anyone who's in the know, let's say anyone who is would argue against the idea of interprovincial trade, pipelines across the country, you know, producing our own oil and gas and things that natural resources use. I mean, we have them, but keeping them here and using them for our own good, and then selling the surplus to then fund this country and all the things that we need. I would like to see somebody explain to me, and explain it to me like I'm a child. Explain it to me why that can't happen. Explain it to me why a country with, if I'm not mistaken, I think we have something like the third or fifth most oil in the world, the third or fifth most natural gas, the most fresh water, the most, I think we have the most uranium. Don't quote me on that.
Rare earth minerals.
Yeah.
Rare earth minerals.
And the other thing they use for the fertilizer, whatever that's called, the stuff they need for. So nevertheless, long story short, we are way up at the top of countries who have the natural resources that we need for us ourselves to be. We should be one of the richest countries in the world. We should be like many other states. We should have no income tax. We should be paying no federal income tax. We should be paying little to no tax probably at all, because again, we have the means to support ourselves, and equally as important for those who want to be selfless about it, we have the means to help other countries around the world with their energy problems and deliver energy and natural resources to them to help bring down their costs to do so. And we extract it and we deal with it far, far better and cleaner than these other places in the world where we're getting it from. And I've never met anybody who explained to me simply why we're not doing that.
Well, it's the Green New Deal.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah, it becomes politics.
It's sustainability and Green New Deal.
Special interest groups. It's all of those things.
So, you know, we are a resource-rich country, and I remember even in elementary school learning that.
Right.
Resource-rich country.
Right.
Lumber.
Sure.
The minerals, like you said, water, and then oil. And liquid natural gas. Right. And, you know, recently, probably a couple of years ago, the Liberal government, and with the support of the NDP, put in C-69, which said that we could not transport any oil, crude oil, or liquid natural gas in the northern waters of Canada to move it to Europe.
Sure.
or other countries because they thought, oh, well, if there's a spill, what's going to happen?
Right.
So we were stuck with one pipeline going down to the United States.
Right.
And that's what Danielle Smith is. She went to Mar-a-Lago, and she's like, she knows we're stuck because we have one pipeline going down to the United States. We do have another one that goes down to the United States, then comes up to the Maritimes for refining in St. John. And I could be in Newfoundland as well. We really need to open up our industry, not just to Canada, but to the world.
Right.
And we've had in the last 2 or 3 years, the German chancellor asking for our liquid natural gas, and the Japanese leaders asking for oil or liquid natural gas. Mm-hmm. And Trudeau said it doesn't make for a good business model.
Sure.
And so that minimum $90 billion went to Qatar.
Yeah.
And whereas we could have been reaping the rewards from that, and we could have reduced our income taxes for all Canadians because now we're selling and our GDP is up. But no, we want to paralyze our people and our natural resources.
Yeah, I mean, that just comes back to what we've been talking about Trudeau and the Liberal government make this statement or make this decision, essentially, that we're not going to do that. We're not going to trade with Japan, for instance. Let's use that example. We're not going to export our natural gas or oil, whatever it might be. But this is just one of those unilateral decisions where it's like, well, that's not, how about asking us? Why don't you ask us what we want to do, right?
Ask Canadians, because
And not only that, but let's see the math on that. What do you mean it's not a good idea? Let's see the actual financials, and then let's decide whether or not it's a good idea. Because when they say something's not a good idea, it has nothing to do with the finances. Because if it was about the finances, we wouldn't be shipping money all over the country to all these other people other than Canadians, and we would be doing the things that are in the best interest of Canadians financially.
So in Canada, contributes 1.4% of all global emissions. Mm-hmm. And then you have the US and like 15%, India, I think it's 22%, China maybe up to 25%, 1.4% Canada.
Right.
It doesn't make sense that we cannot produce our crude oil, our heavy oil, our bitumen, our liquid natural gas. Even we could have rare earth mineral mines that process the rare earth minerals rather than having to ship them to China. Mm-hmm. We could actually be doing it here. And the reason why is because it's dirty. People go, oh, it's dirty, the rare earth mineral processing. Well, let's do it in a way that it's not dirty or that it minimizes the impact on the environment. It's like we're actually doing it in a way that's nefarious in some ways. It's like, okay, we're going to ship our rare earth minerals over to China so they can do all the dirty work.
Yeah, it's kind of like,
and we're trying to,
no, I can't hear it.
So we're trying to do this. We're good global partners, but we're sending it somewhere else.
Sure. Yeah, it's dirty and it makes a mess and it's bad for the environment.
Yeah.
So let's not do it here, but let's have it done somewhere else where they use child slave labor to do it instead.
That's right.
As long as my iPhone turns on, it's fine.
Yeah.
If everyone were properly informed of what's currently happening, how these things are being dealt with, how the laws are being applied and or not being applied. And if everyone was informed correctly, like imagine if you turn on the television and you got just the news, the facts of the matter, and then you determine for yourself how to interpret that and what you think of that, then the mindset of Canadians would be entirely different than it is. But we're just fed with, the news comes in the form of, well, first of all, it's skewed and it's not correct, but then it also comes with this sentiment of compassion, like you say, or whatever it might be. But if people were really, truly informed of the real crime statistics of what's being taking place around them, the real immigration numbers of what's taking place around them, the real numbers with respect to, or the real information with respect to foreign influence and government corruption and scandals and all that shit that goes on, like, whatever happened to the 11 traitors or the 11 MPs that were involved, that were not named, I shouldn't say that. That whole topic just went away. We just forget about that. We just let it go.
Well, so they were having, do you remember, so the National Security Commission of Investigation of parliamentarians. It's like NSCOP is what it's called.
Okay.
They did that investigation, and their investigation from June 2024 was like they were interviewing the leaders of the parties, but then they decided to have this Justice Hogue do the investigation. And she said that there were 54 recommendations. She said that, and only 21 would be would begin before the next election, for the next election. But she said, there were things that, yes, happened. However, the MPs were semi-witting or witting of what actually happened in the foreign interference. And so I thought, well, what does that mean? So they were semi-knowledgeable or fully knowledgeable that there was foreign interference.
Right. But we've dropped it.
And so we've dropped this now.
For all we know, these folks are running for election again. They will run for election again.
I actually looked back, and you can do this, at Elections Canada donations. Mm-hmm. And I went back to when Trudeau was being elected. And there is a maximum donation you can give a year to a party. Mm-hmm. And right now it's $1,750 per year. But I looked back, I think it was 2015, just before the election, and there were a whole bunch of people in BC with Asian names who gave maximum donations to Justin Trudeau's riding. Mm-hmm. And so I was just like, that's really odd. You don't see that many people giving maximum donations.
Especially outside of their own riding.
Correct.
Yeah.
So they were giving to the Papineau riding.
Sure.
So I just found that, okay, like that could be investigated. So you could have somebody that's saying, okay, I'm going to give you some money. You're going to write like you've donated it and you're going to get that tax credit. But it's going to Trudeau's because we need him to be the leader.
Well, you said earlier about the fact that there should be and needs to be transparency between the government and the people, right? Because at the end of the day, the government works for the people. That's how it's supposed to work. They've been elected to represent the people and then go handle the business of the country or the business of the province, whatever the jurisdiction might be. But there's no transparency. It's anything but transparent. When you ask any of these elected officials, when they get in front of a microphone and they're asked a question, first of all, there are certain questions nobody ever asks. Like, for instance, we are all well aware that organizations like the WEF exist, and the UN and the WHO and all these different organizations. But the WEF comes to mind because it amazes me that on one hand, we're all well aware of it. Like, it's not like it's a secret, right? These folks have their pictures on the website and they go over to, the Davos thing and they have these, what would you call it?
Mastermind sessions.
Yeah.
It's basically.
And these people go and they speak, and I know Chrystia Freeland, I'm pretty sure she
was
kind
part
of
of the director.
Higher up. Yeah.
She was a treasurer or something.
Yeah, she's up there in that organization. But I have never seen ever anyone ask her about her relationship or association with the WEF, ever. Now, I see people on social media making comments about, CBC News will print out some stupid headline like Freeland, decides, she's going to run for prime minister. Okay, great. And then you'll see a whole bunch of people down below that in the comments make comments about the fact that she's a globalist, she's a member of the WEF, she's not working in the best interest of Canadians and so on. And it's true. That information is true, but nobody ever takes the mic and goes, are you a member of the WEF? Could you tell, what is the WEF? What is your relationship with them? Why? What is this? Right?
Well,
Can you
I should say it was a think tank. It seemed to be a think tank when they started it, but I think it has a lot of influence on our leaders.
Sure it does. But if nothing else, the fact that nobody will address it. It's not like if they said, hey, we noticed you're a member of CAA. Is that if your car breaks down? She said, yeah, I'm a member of CAA in case my car breaks down.
Yeah,
but why do we just avoid the whole question?
They avoid There's
only one person that mentions it, though. Polyev does mention it. He
and
brings
so does
it up.
Maxime.
Maxime, sorry. I'm sorry. Maxime definitely mentions it, yes.
Maxime will say, yeah, I was the foreign affairs minister, and it was at the time of the Afghan war. And Afghanistan war. And so I needed to go and I needed to talk to other foreign affairs ministers
Sure.
about how were we going to support each other in terms of military action. Yeah.
Sure. But it amazes me that it's just something that nobody ever talks about. I saw a clip one time where one of the MPs in the House of Commons, this is probably a couple of years ago now, stood up and brought it up and brought, I don't remember you could find this clip on social media, but this gentleman brought up and had a question about something along the lines of whoever he was directing it to, could they speak to their involvement with or association with the WEF? And then the Speaker of the House kind of stood up, called an intermission or a break. Oh, let's all just take 5. And then they went away. And then they came back, I think. And that was it. The question never got answered.
Actually, the mic got cut on the gentleman.
That's right.
On the MP or that, yeah.
That's right. So if it's nothing, if the WF is nothing, if what they're saying is, listen, it's just an organization where, world leaders get together and you shoot the shit and you throw some ideas around. Okay, then say that.
So
why are you hiding?
A lot of people have problems with it, not just because, it could be too much of an influence on our leaders, because it should be the people of Canada, the people of that country who determine, what we want as policies, right?
Sure.
To maintain sovereignty. And you've got, here was the funny thing. It's like you've got all these world leaders saying, yeah, we got to cut zero emissions. And there was one reporter, it might have been Rebel News, and they actually had photos of all the private planes that had arrived near Davos.
Right.
And said, so these are the people, these are the elites that are going to tell you that you can't fly.
Sure.
Right. And they were, they promote, I think Trudeau gets a lot of his ideas from there.
He gets a lot of his direction. From there.
Yeah, direction. Right. These institutions or these bodies, they don't belong in a nation that is democratic and sovereign. Mm-hmm. Should be the people who decide. Sure. And that's always, and people need to talk about that.
Sure.
Right? It's like you can listen, you can sort of go, okay, I'm going to see what they recommend, and then from there, decide on our own.
Sure.
You can always do that, right?
I've always thought that there would be, whatever it is, whether it's at whatever level, national, at the national level or provincial or even municipal level. I've always thought if there was a government or a political party who made it their goal to share transparently all the information, but you'd have to take that information and summarize. You got to break it down, because the average person is not going to read through a 400-page document talking about whatever issue it is that we're talking. You got to extrapolate from that and put the real information there. And if some other political party, for instance, has a different feeling about that, that's fine. But if you take the information and you put it there for people to see, and the whole idea is you're trying to inform people of the truth without, even on your own end, without being, here's the truth, and so vote for us. But if it's just like, here is the real information of what's happening, here's the real information surrounding, take the border scenario, the fentanyl crisis, the 4,000 gangs and so on. Like, just take that information and package it. But you would need some people who are very good at collecting the information and then articulating that in simple form and organizing it and putting it on a, whether it's a website or however you communicate. But if you could get people more informed, then you're going to have a better chance of, if you're the party who wants people to make common sense, rational decisions based on truthful information, then you got to get them the truthful information.
Yeah, and that's a really good way of, making sure that your message gets across.
And I think from a political perspective, like, when you're trying to find political candidates to run at whatever level, the better that candidate can be at articulating the facts of the matter, mm-hmm. and then being willing and able to have a conversation or debate, I guess, with anyone that comes opposing that, the better, of course. But it always turns in, it seems now, it just turns into back and forth. It just turns into arguments about this party versus that party, and rights and lefts and liberals and conservatives. And the issue immediately goes away. Whatever the issue was, it's lost in the first sentence, because it just turns into this attack back and forth. It's
like I was talking at our EDA meeting, the AGM that we had in the spring, and I said one of my motions would be that all MPs have to have one citizenship, Canadian.
Yes.
And then I had some pushback from some people that Michelle, like I have British passport, I'm like, so then you don't run for
Then
MP?
you can't be an MP. That's right. We're not saying you got to drop your citizenship. You just can't be an
can
MP.
live in Canada, but as a Canadian, but you're just not going to make laws for Canadians.
Yeah.
Right?
I also think that to be the Prime Minister of Canada, you should have to be born in this country. And that's not a rule.
And revoke all the other citizenships. Because Mark
insane to
Carney,
me.
he shouldn't even be a qualifier.
No,
He
I agree.
might have been born in Alberta, but he hasn't even lived here for 11 years.
Right.
And he's advertising gleefully that he has a Scottish passport and a British passport.
Yeah, I think it's Irish, right? It's an Irish
something,
and British.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, well, it's something other than Canadian.
Right.
Right. And I'm like, well, you need to just say, I have given those back and I'm solely Canadian. If you want to represent and you want to create legislature and laws to protect Canadians, then you need to be Canadian
But
solely.
I'm willing to bet if you went out to the street with a microphone and you ran into people and you said, hey, did you know that you don't have to actually be born in Canada to be the Prime Minister? I guarantee you, I'll be willing to bet the majority of people will say, no, I would have assumed you had to be born here to be the Prime Minister. And if the follow-up question was, well, now that you know that, do you think you should have to be born in the country in order to be Prime Minister? I'm willing to bet that the majority of those,
May say no?
again, would probably say yes.
Oh,
no,
you think
I think
so?
they would say
Yeah.
yes. Everyone I mentioned to, there were normally, like in recent days, because of this Mark Carney scenario comes up when you're talking with people. And the conversations I've had, most people are surprised to hear that you don't have to be born in the country to be the Prime Minister. I can't understand any argument the other way around, because people might say, well, what if somebody's just they would make a really great Prime Minister, but they were born in a different country? Well, then I guess they wouldn't make a really great Prime Minister by default.
It eliminates them.
You just told me.
It
the
omits
answer.
them.
Right.
Yeah, no. I truly believe, because I think there has to be all skin in the game. You have all skin in the game. You can't go running.
Nowhere to run to.
Yeah, nowhere to run, and you have to take that role seriously. Being an MP is not easy. And it's not just representing your people. It's actually bringing to the House of Commons, initiative.
Yeah. I think being an MP, being a politician in general nowadays, though, I think as time goes on, I find more and more, it would be, I find it hard to imagine how most people would even consider it, because it's become such a toxic environment to be in. It's like it's the only environment I can think nowadays, in a time where everyone is all about work-life balance and everyone being accepted and the workplace being an accepting environment, and nobody should have to put up with any drama or conflict. But certainly politicians do. It's amazing what they have to put up with.
Well,
how people speak to them and what they say.
It's a lot of good people who probably would like to run, don't run.
Of course not.
Because they don't want to have their reputation scarred.
Sure.
They have a great reputation, and all of a sudden there's this, backlash in the newspaper about them. I've had it happen myself, but I just said to my family, I know who I am, and they don't know me. They've never met me. They have no idea who I am, and they're just writing this because I don't represent the party they want.
That's
they
right.
like.
That's right.
Right?
Exactly.
So you have to have that backbone. But, I think about how hard my parents worked and how hard troops worked in World War I and World War II. I can do it.
Yeah, sure you can. Yeah, and that's commendable that you go into it eyes wide open, knowing that you are going to be subject to that. You're going to take some heat for not because it has anything to do with you at a personal level, but it's just who you're associated with. And that's just because you're associated with a different team. You're not on their team. And politics is this thing where if you're not on their team, you're enemies. That's what it's become. It's
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And, you know, I've had the Conservative Party ask me many times. They just asked me again, are you going to be running for the People's Party of Canada? I'm like, yes. Okay. They shut the door again. Right? Because I'm not interested. I'm interested in bringing something new to Canada, something that people need. And I think the People's Party actually, they have the policies that Conservative people want to see.
I agree.
Right?
Yes, I agree.
That's what it is.
Very well articulated, I might add. They're on the PPC website. I've read through them. I've read through the entire platform. Even when we met, or it was 8 or 9 months ago when we had that conversation, you know, like I told you, I think this is really well written. It's very clear and it's very well articulated, and everyone should be able to read through this and understand it. And even if you read through it and say, I don't agree with that, that's fine.
You don't have to agree with every policy.
That's right.
Even our MPs, like the people that are running in you know, for the People's Party, they may not agree with every policy.
Sure.
There's not going to be a whip. We don't have, Max doesn't have a whip. He's like, I don't believe in that. I believe in a democratic, you know, democratic government. So why would I make sure that, like, oh, you're whipped, you have to vote this way? Your people may not want you to vote that way. Right. You may have a distinct riding where it's not going to benefit them. And we need to get to a point where we actually, our policies are there to stimulate our economy and help people prosper and thrive. That's what it should be for. Not, oh, well, I'm in power now. I've got this ego and I got to keep my seat, you know?
Right.
Too much of that now.
Yes, of course.
Right? And
you can
people
even
have to
see
be
it
in
within
it.
the Liberal Party in this last month when the party is blown up. Trudeau, quote unquote, resigns or says he's going to resign, but we know he didn't. He's still there. And then all this gong show that's going on within their party trying to find a new leader, and they basically always knew who that leader was going to be. They were just looking for an opportunity to insert the billionaire globalist with 3 passports, and that was always going to be the case. I mean, his name was thrown around every time an election was approaching for the past little while. His name was always thrown around. At some point, like, he was going to step into it, and
he's not even elected. He's not even a sitting member.
No Canadian has ever voted.
I'd like to know how many
ever.
years he's paid income tax, like in the last 11 years. Like,
right.
What is he?
But then it's just the same thing. Then you watch the Liberal Party, the MPs, to your point, you watch these MPs who, just like overnight, like a switch, they went from Trudeau's the guy and he has our support and they all support him, and then the minute he said, I'm going to resign, within probably hours of when Mark Carney announced that he was going to run, within hours you saw MPs voicing their support and their endorsement for him. So it's like how quickly they just flip-flop from this person they supported through all these terrible decisions and this decline of our nation. And then just like a light switch, they jump behind the guy that, you know, is a complete outsider. He's an outsider, but he's not an outsider. And it's just
well, he
nonsensical.
doesn't speak French that well. And one of the things, I mean, we have 2 official languages. Mm-hmm. You better know how to speak French really well.
Well, they had the other candidate who spoke no French, and they just
that person who thought it didn't matter, just policy mattered. I grew up in Quebec. Language does matter.
Of course it does. Yeah, sure.
Language does matter.
And if the Liberal Party was going to take it upon themselves to decide, oh, we're no longer going to make that important, okay, fine. But it wouldn't just be one guy steps up and says, I don't care if it's important or not. But I never did hear any more about that. He would just
they said
away.
that he wasn't allowed to run anymore because I guess, I don't know. I think.
But that's it. Why? Why wasn't he allowed to run anymore?
Because I don't know, but I'm thinking it had something to do with the language issue.
Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting this guy she should have never ran to begin with. This is somebody who moved here like 10 years ago. He moved here when he was 43 years old.
He should never qualified.
That's what I mean.
To actually put his name in the race.
He wasn't qualified to ever be in the race. Nobody, and not just him specifically, anyone who moves here from another country and doesn't speak both languages, because those are, I don't know if that's officially a rule or not, but it's certainly an understanding that the Prime Minister will speak both official languages.
Well, if you're going to work for Canadians and put them first, you better speak both languages.
Yes, I agree. That's
so
now in saying that, I also understand the argument to what we said earlier, where that may very well mean that somebody who would make a fantastic Prime Minister can't be the Prime Minister because they don't speak French. That's entirely possible that there's a candidate who would be awesome, but if that person's 50 years old, they're not going to learn French between now and the time they need
Well,
to get
it's
elected.
possible then. What I would suggest is if you do have a great candidate and you still want to be able to communicate with, your population, your entire population, then you would have kind of the lieutenant who would be able to communicate with that and is with that person all the time.
I agree. I think there's a way around it. I don't think nowadays in today's technology, plus with the technology that's in our hand, the translation is very easy. So I also understand the other side of the argument where perhaps that's not necessary, right? Perhaps it's not necessary that the prime minister can be bilingual, because there are definitely ways to communicate that.
Yeah.
It could be somebody literally standing beside you. You say something, and they repeat it, if that's what it is. But there's also devices in our hands that translate everything in real time for us. But that's a separate issue. But for the time being, I completely understand that the prime minister needs to be bilingual.
So the whole thing with Mark Carney, did you notice that once you had these people talking like Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney saying, oh, we're going to get rid of the consumer carbon tax. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, if you weren't for it, truly for it before, why didn't you speak up?
Yeah, but that's pretty obvious. So they're just the liberals.
The whip, I guess.
They'll say whatever they need to say to get elected. They'll say anything to get elected right now.
So, but Mark Carney is like, well, I really agreed that, we should go to zero emissions. And that's why I pulled out my investments and then went to Brazil and UAE. And it's like, And now you're saying, let's get rid of the consumer carbon tax. It's like, well, how can we believe you? Like,
well, you shouldn't believe him.
Right? It's like people should be saying this. Same with Chrystia.
He's contradicted himself. There are video clips of him contradicting himself. There's video clips of him talking about companies that don't get on board with the climate thing will go bankrupt and should go bankrupt. There's clips in here him talking about how people need to be or people or companies should be punished. He used the word punished.
He did say that.
For not getting on board with their climate policies and so on. I mean, this guy he's a villain. He's the bad guy.
Yeah.
Like, there's a movie, there's a bad guy, he's it, right? And people can't see that because, he's wearing a $3,000 suit and he's a billionaire and he's well-spoken and he's got a $50 haircut? What? This is the bad guy. This is the guy that has been behind the curtain with the other bad guys behind the curtain. And then he took this as an opportunity to pull the curtain back and step out and pretend that he hasn't been back there pulling the chains the whole time.
Yeah.
It's blatantly obvious. And 50% of the people that are listening to this right now think that I'm a nut job conspiracy theorist because they don't realize who this guy is.
It's true. And even the British Parliament said that, he has helped destroy their economy as well.
There was an MP, there was a lady who said that.
It was the woman, I can't remember her name because she was only prime minister for like 2 months.
That's right.
That's right. And she's like, we listened to him and it was like a disaster.
Yes, exactly.
Do you want him to destroy your economy as well?
Yeah. And I've seen that clip and it's out there and I'm thinking, again, that would come back to the media side of things. Like, how does that never get the light of day? How is that comment never brought up in our media? But
then,
right?
I'll have to say, I got the feminist friends who are like, oh, Chrystia Freeland, like I'm going to vote for her, and I'm like, do you remember what she did? If you protested, she would freeze your bank account. And she was like so happy about doing that. So who does that? And then she said the budget was going to be $40 billion. And then she raised it, took it up to $61 billion.
That's right. And quit. The day she was supposed to present it to avoid facing the music. And some people say, well, she didn't get quit. She got fired. Well, which is it?
Well, because she wouldn't agree with something. But then I thought, is this all in the making of he was going to resign and then she had to separate herself and then say that she was going to run for prime minister? So, there are all these different scenarios we could think about and because they're not transparent.
No, of course not. That whole idea of I'm going to vote for somebody because they're a man or woman is insane anyway. And there are a number of women that I don't know if I've seen any on the liberal side, but there are a number of women, certainly in the Conservative Party, who I've seen speak, and women like yourself. I'm like, I could see a feminist saying, I would vote for this woman because she's a woman. Okay, I don't think that's why you should vote for people, but I agree with you. This person's really smart. They're laying it out there for you, and they're articulate and they're well informed. And I could see how you would vote for that person.
Women like me who say I'd vote for you because I've had that. And, oh, we need more women in politics. And I'm like, well, I'm not doing it because I'm a woman.
Yeah, I would use, Danielle Smith in Alberta as an example of somebody who, perhaps maybe some people voted for her because she was a woman, but I'm sure most people probably voted for her because you listen to her speak and watch what she does and you realize she's a highly competent, effective person.
Yes.
So of course they voted for it. I know there's a whole thing there when it comes to Alberta, and they have people in Alberta have a certain outlook, and there's a lot of animosity there, and it keeps getting fueled in these recent events with tariffs and the stuff about oil and pipelines and all that stuff. But set that aside for a minute. When I watch Danielle Smith speak or be questioned or have conversation about something, I'm like, yeah, well, of course this person got
makes
elected.
sense.
Gosh, she's smart, she's competent, she's a highly functioning individual. But I don't actually see a woman that somebody voted for. I just see a very competent, capable person.
Yes,
right?
that's what you want.
Right.
You want the competent, capable person who has a good head on their shoulders. I know we all have the right to vote, but I also think that with that right becomes a responsibility to understand what you're voting for and who you're voting for and what their policies are and how it's going to change the lives of Canadians, make it better, make it worse.
Yeah, I agree. I think too many people put no effort into finding out the answers to any of those things that you just said. And I think if people looked at it as more of a business decision, if you said, look, pretend just for a minute, pretend it's not an election for political parties and for the nation. Pretend you're a shareholder of the company and you get a chance to vote for the CEO or the board of directors, your MPs, for instance, being the board of directors. If you're going to vote for these folks, would you really vote for the guy because he has nice hair? No, you'd want to make sure that your return on investment is going to be there. You want to make sure that your share value is going to be maintained. And so if you looked at it from a practical, pragmatic business perspective and said, wouldn't you want to know some things about what this person you're going to elect or vote for, what they plan to do, what their policies are, what their overall outlook is on how things should be and how they plan to manage this? You would do that if it was going to tie directly and immediately back to your finances. Yeah. You would do that. But it does. That's what people don't realize. It does pull back to that.
People listen to their friends a lot too.
Anything else on the that we should cover here today? Anything regarding the People's Party that you want to mention? Any topic you wanted to run over?
So with Maxime Bernier, there are some new criteria for the leaders' debates. And so the last time it was 4% from an election. I think you only had to have one criteria out of 3. Now you have to have 2. You have to have either a sitting member of parliament for that party, 90% of all ridings, like 90% of Canada, then 90% of the ridings have to be filled with a candidate,
Okay.
And so that's about 308. So we have to have a 308 in the next federal election. And polling has to be 4%. Polling. And that's a real big issue because a lot of times in the polls, the PPC is not even included in the poll.
Yeah, in the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that. I was going to say I've seen that before. Where you'll get you get a text message, whatever they use these days, and it'll be like Liberal, NDP, Conservative,
and Green.
Green, maybe. Green. I never see PPC as an option.
So then it's like, well, how are we going to manage that if they take the average of polls?
There's not a certain polling company that they refer to?
They said they'd take the average of the polls that have been out there. And I believe it's so many days before the election as well.
Okay.
Whereas I think before they said, Max, you're fine because you got over 5% of the vote last time, so you'll be good. And but then they changed that. So, I don't know why they wanted to change it because it seemed to be working, but maybe they just don't want him to express his views, and it takes a voice away from the Canadian people. Mm-hmm. The last election, we had 800,000 votes. The Green had 300,000.
Is that right?
And they have 2 or 3 sitting members. I think they have 2 now. And, because the way the electorate is formed in terms of like the elections, you have to get so many in that particular riding rather than reform it and just do like a proportional representation. So if we did proportional representation, which I think Trudeau ran on, he said he was going to reform the election process. He didn't. So there's one promise he didn't keep. And so if we had done the proportional representation way of voting and electing people, we would have had 16 seats as the PPC.
16 seats in
Yep.
the last election?
Yeah.
Really?
I believe it was, I think I calculated that, 16 seats, that's fairly good out of 338 people.
Yeah. You mean, when you say that, you're talking proportionally as if you take the 800,000 votes and
Yes.
compare that to the however many people might have been, 36 million or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's like first past the post right now in terms of a riding.
Sure.
So there are some ridings like with Elizabeth May, she won her seat because she's on Salt Spring Island, and so she would have probably gotten the majority of the people there. So she wins her seat.
Mm-hmm.
And so some other person in Fredericton won their seat, or Nanaimo. So, then you've got people that don't have a voice. And there were 800,000 people that didn't have a voice.
So do you know how the polls currently shake out? Are there any PPC candidates that are looking strong in their riding? Do you know at this point?
I'm not sure. I really think polls are a sort of manipulation of
Sure.
the election process. Because you see it and then it kind of sways you.
Yeah, it could go either way too.
Right?
Right. It could actually work. It could actually work. It could work either way. So you might see, I agree with you. I think that when I see polls from time to time, and so it could be, for instance, if your party, your team is looking strong, in the polls, you might think, oh, well, I don't have to bother voting them. We're good. We got this. Right. But maybe you don't have it because maybe the poll is inaccurate. Or the other way around, you might say, if you look like your team's getting stomped, right? If you're a Liberal voter and you look like it's, and it's like 55% conservative and you're running at 22, it's like, oh, why bother voting? We're going to get stomped. So I agree with you. The polls could be, on one hand, I get the argument of what purpose do they really serve?
Yeah, really. Right? It's like maybe
it doesn't matter till it's over and the votes are counted. What's it matter what people say in a survey about? I mean, I'm sure there are arguments for why it does matter, but
thinking about the polls, there was so I went door to door this one time. I guess might have been 2021 when I was going, because I did the 2019 and then the 2021 election. And I get to this door and there's this young woman there, and I said, oh, I'm here, with the People's Party of Canada. I'm looking for your vote. And she's like, oh, I'm already voting for you. I said, oh, and she goes, I said, you know much about the party? She said, well, I went to this app that asked me questions about how I felt about certain things. And then it suggested that you were the party that I would have to vote for.
Oh, really?
Right? And so she said like immigration and some other things and the economy and natural resource development. And she said all those questions pointed me to you. So she either voted already or she was going to vote. Yeah. So there's some app. I wonder if it's still out there, and that would be interesting for people to use, and so that they'd be able to, okay, this is the party.
Yeah.
So maybe younger people will be looking at that. We have a new generation PPC that represents people between the ages of 14 and 29. And so this is young people who are getting out to universities and colleges and that, and talking about the People's Party of Canada. Mm-hmm. And they're seeing more people concerned about what's happening. In the 2019 election, you had people that, were concerned, young people who were concerned with their future, because you had this agenda that was, or this phrase that was out there, that the world was going to burn up in 11 years.
Right.
And that was a big issue for a lot of young people. And I think it if they were suffering from mental illness or just about to suffer, it turned them around. Like it took them over the hill, and they became depressed because they're like, well, what kind of future do I have? What am I working towards?
Sure. I guess the thing that's now, I think what magnifies that, or amplifies that, I should say, is that is social media and the access to it, right? Because there's always been a thing. It was acid rain, the ozone layer, global warming.
Or global freezing.
Global freezing. And then now it's just, and then they're like, oh God, what the hell can we call this? Because everything keeps getting disproved. And then they go, oh, let's just go with climate change. Let's just use the word change. Then no matter what happens, whether it snows more this winter or doesn't snow at all, or it's colder or it's warmer, it doesn't matter. It's all just climate change. So no matter what happens, we can just say climate change, and we'll get those who can be manipulated into making decisions because we fearmonger them.
People that don't have a lot of money and they're just trying to make ends meet, it's like, are they really thinking about if they're changing the climate, their activities are impacting the climate? They're thinking about, I got to get that food on the table for my kids. I got to have that gas in my car to go to work.
For whatever reason, when it comes to climate change or climate related things, environmental things, for whatever reason, otherwise sensible, relatively intelligent human beings throw all common sense out the window, and they rely on what the politician is telling them, or somebody who's supporting whatever it is they're trying to sell to you, and they will do no research on their own. They won't look into it. They won't seek any scientific data or any empirical data to make their decision. But for whatever reason, they'll do that when it comes to the climate. But they would never do that if it was their car was in need of repair. So if you took your car in and a mechanic looked at your car and said it needs front brakes and rotors, then you'd probably go with that. You might get a second opinion from another mechanic, perhaps, but you wouldn't go to work. And if the guy you worked with who knows nothing about cars said, "And it's not brakes and rotors, you need a new muffler." Or if you flipped on CBC News and there was a politician on there who said, "Yeah, listen, if your car is making this noise, it's not brakes and rotors. You need a new muffler. So you need to pay muffler tax, and then everything will be better." You wouldn't just throw out all common sense and ignore the people who really actually have the answers and listen to these other people. It's just weird.
You do remember, okay, so there was, when I first started running in 2019, my neighbors, they were like, well, what are you doing about climate change? And I'm like, well, we want a clean environment for Canada. So, we were talking about keeping the lakes clean, the waters clean, and making sure people had clean water, and making sure that management of garbage disposal and that was taken seriously. Now, and they go, well, what about the polar bears? Because there's less polar bears in the Arctic. And that was disproven. Actually, there are a lot lot bears. They're thriving.
Sure. But not only that, when somebody says,
but they got that from CBC or somewhere, and it was like, oh, polar bears. And so for 3 months, there was like, the polar bears are dying. It's like, no, they're not.
Sure. And if somebody says, what are you doing about climate change? If somebody asked me that, I would probably say, what would you have me do?
Well, actually, I said that I would actually develop our natural resources, stop buying from Saudi, stop buying unethical oil.
Yes.
And we actually, as Canadians, would be working on developing this.
That's right.
And then we would be selling to other nations who have dirty emissions.
Yeah, this oil is going to come out of the ground one way or another. It's going to come out in Canada. It's going to come out in Qatar or wherever
Brazil or UAE, which Mark Carney invested in.
That's right. But we put far more energy and time and money and effort into extracting that oil as efficiently as possible and as environmentally sensitively as possible.
And ethically, right?
Yes.
I mean, we treat our employees right in Canada.
Sure.
We have those standards. And that's what, we can't control what's going on in another nation, but we can control what's going on here.
That's right.
And so wouldn't they feel better that we are developing the resources here
That's right.
under direction of proper ethics?
Yeah, if you could only get that message out to more
Well, that's
people.
what I hope to do.
Yeah, you're doing it. Things like
Thank
this.
you.
Anything else we should cover? Anything else we should go over?
You can follow me at Canada_source on Instagram.
Okay.
And I just wanted to say that I do, once in a while, I'll talk about how Canadians can stay healthy. And one of my businesses is to help people learn how to lift weights and enhance their muscle mass. And muscle mass helps with longevity and actually can help with systemic issues like diabetes and that. So, if anyone wants to get in touch with me, they can do it through Canada_source. And that's all I have to say. But hopefully we'll do this again. There's a lot of information all the time coming out.
Yeah.
Yes.
For sure. I appreciate you being here. And best of luck in the election, whenever that is. Who knows when that'll take place? Whenever they get round to it, I guess, or whenever it's forced upon us or made to happen, I guess. But yeah, best of luck in that, and I appreciate you being here. I think it was a good conversation, and I hope you're effective at putting your message out there and reaching some people and trying to get the fact of the matter to them.
I actually am in the midst of getting my nomination signatures. So we have to have 100 nomination signatures from the people in our riding.
Okay.
And so I usually get a little bit more than that just to have that insurance policy.
Sure.
And so if you know anyone in my riding, send them to me. Have them reach out to me.
Is
Dartmouth Cole Harbour.
Dartmouth Cole Harbour.
Part of Eastern Passage now too. And if they can sign they don't have to even vote for me. Just they know that I'm going to be running, and it's a democratic process. And if they believe in that, then it's always great to have extra voices running in those elections.
Yeah, very good. Okay. Well, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks.